October 16th, we do not have an accurate representation of the members in attendance. I spoke several times throughout the minutes and recorded as such, but was not listed as an attendee. So I request that the minutes be altered to include all attendees.
Any objection? Seeing none. Yes, Yehuda.
We've had a lot of discussion of the format of the minutes, and I would like to commend the minutes taker for a concise and easy to understand copy of the minutes.
Excellent. All right. Then if there are no other objections, we will approve the minutes with a caveat to correct the attendees. So if you do not see yourself on the attendance list, please let Edie or myself know, and we will ensure that you are included on the official minutes. Okay, next order of business, we have our invited speaker for today, the Vice President of Student Affairs, Dr. Patty Perillo, who we're going to give a few minutes to speak to us about the state of the university, and then we will have some time for questions. So Dr. Perillo, take it away.
Simon, thank you. And I just want to clarify, I know that Dan and I have been emailing each other. Do you want to, I'll present for about 10, 15 minutes and then take some questions for about 10 or 15 minutes. Is that right? Great. Okay, terrific. So can I share my screen? Is that possible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Edie's fixed it for you, yes.
I love when someone fixes it for me. Thank you. Okay, so what I'd like to do is spend some time talking about student affairs, who we are and our priorities. But I want to begin by saying I have something in common with each of you that I know for sure is that I was a graduate student at the University of Maryland. I got my PhD in public and community health here from this institution. And so I know what it's like to be a graduate student on this campus. And so we have that shared and lived experience. I started here in January as Vice President for Student Affairs. And it literally was 3 days before we as a campus started having conversations around COVID and campus response to COVID. And it's where I learned on day 3 that I actually chaired the campus incident response team. And so I shared in the responsibility to lead campus efforts in COVID response. And so it's been a baptism by fire. I've learned a ton, and I'm grateful to be in community with leaders who care deeply about students and their experience and care about community, and also with graduate students like you. The fact that you all are here means that you signed up and stepped up and chose to be leaders, which means you are great citizens of this community. And I'm really grateful for that. So I'd like to begin there. I've spent the morning since 8 a.m. this morning talking with students and others about how they're doing. I can't imagine spending time with graduate students without beginning with just creating a little bit of space. What I know is that we are in the most contested, consequential election of hopefully your lifetime, likely my lifetime too. And to be where we are without knowing the results, and likely might not know for another day or 3 days, these complicated, difficult times, regardless of who you chose to vote for, these are just different and interesting times. And I think it's important to create space. I literally, from 8 to 9, 9 to 10:30, 10:30 to 11, 11 to 11:30, 11:30 to 12, I've been in meetings all morning, just creating space for people to talk about how they're doing, to give voice to their feeling, to talk about what they hope for. And so what I'd like to do now is just to open the space that for anybody that wants to share how they're thinking or how they're feeling or what do they need to be supported. And it doesn't have to be all 50 of us or 35 of us on this call, but I'd like to create an opportunity for anyone that just wants to speak up to say, this is how I'm doing, or this is what I'm thinking. And my hope is that we don't do it here, that you all create these spaces in whatever circles that you are in, and those circles that you have leadership and responsibility for, because it's really just important. So is there anyone that wants to share how you're doing? How are you feeling?
I'll go first.
Right.
Hi, my name's Tamara. I'm from Psych. This has been a really tough week, not just because of the election, but also because there's been some family health issues that I won't get into. And then on top of that, my thesis. And so I just feel really overwhelmed. And I've been trying to like find ways to like refill my cup, so to say. But it's been difficult, right? Because like you're trying to help other people around you, but it feels like you don't really have a cup to pour from, if that makes sense. And so I feel mostly overwhelmed.
Makes a lot of sense, Tamara. Makes a whole lot of sense. And I think, part of what you spoke to, it's not just about the elections, it's about the pandemic, right? It's not, none of us have lived through kind of this 9 months of enduring hardships as a collective, as a world collective, right? We've never had this experience before as humanity. And how it creates ongoing angst and stress is understandable. So I appreciate your giving voice to that. And I hope you find ways to fill your cup, because you need to.
Thank you.
Alec, I saw you unmuted. Something you want to share?
Yes, Alec Dennis, Business and Management. I know a lot of people, just regarding the pandemic and kind of that broader situation, are kind of concerned for what our prospects are in terms of getting jobs and things like that, with a lot of not every graduate student by any means, but a lot of, in particular, PhD students are planning on entering academia following graduation. And with the hiring freezes that a lot of institutions have instituted, a lot of us are worried about, running out of our funding here and having to graduate and move on, only to see a job market that looks particularly brutal and unpleasant. And so it's kind of a question of, at some point we recognize that of course one needs to sink or swim, but there's also a little bit of not wanting to get kicked out of the nest while they're still into kind of a very unforgiving job environment. And so I know a number of people from my program have concerns about that.
Yeah. And Alec, one of the things that you speak to is that, that there are people who study hope, right? And a really important element of hope is that you have faith in a brighter future, or you have faith in a promising future. And some might lay kind of politics even on that, but separate from the politics, the fact that you talk about in this pandemic, uncertainty about your assistantships and uncertainty about the prospect of jobs. What we know is creating greater angst and anxiety and depression amongst undergrad students and graduate students. And that is just real, right? It is just real. And I think it's important to speak about that, because I think that there is healing in knowing that you're not alone, and healing and understanding that it's a shared experience and that it's human and natural to feel the ways that you're feeling. And we are committed to providing resources for students to support them in their journeys. And so I'm glad you gave voice to that as well. So the combination of kind of well-being resources that I think Tamara and you speak to, whether it's through Counseling Center or Behavioral Health or RecWell or faculty staff assistance programs, there's lots of resources in place, or through the Career Center that's specifically focused on graduate student careers as well. I mean, there's a person in that office, her name's Susan Martin. I worked with her at UMBC and she's here now. And she's specifically hired in the Career Center to focus on graduate students. And she's not the only person, but she's the one that I know because I've known her for a long time. But there are resources available to support you as well. So thank you for naming that too. Others? Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So kind of going along with Alec's point, a lot of the anxiety from my constituents in my department, as well as myself, is like the financial strain of the pandemic. And so I guess I'm wondering, a lot of us had like grants that fell through where I was expecting additional income from my stipend for the next year and a half that's now indefinitely postponed. Like I'm just not getting that money that I was really planning to have. And so I guess I'm wondering if you can provide any kind of details on whether there will be more funding from like the CARES Act. Like it was, I took advantage of that in the summer and that was very helpful. But again, it was like a one-time thing. And like, this was supposed to be over a year of extra income that I'm now missing. And so I guess I'm wondering if you know anything from the university's position on whether they'll get more funding for a program like that, or what we should kind of think to do to make up that money that now we've lost.
Sure. And Kristen, thanks for, again, it's just another layer of what people are carrying with them, right? So I continue to talk about the triple pandemics that we are experiencing, the one of health, the one of economics, and the one of racial and social injustice, right? So the economics is very real too. And you were speaking to that, and Alec is speaking to that as well. So this over the last 9 months, I almost said the last 9 years, because it does feel like that, right? It just feels like we've been in this for a long time. We had both the Student Crisis Fund, which went to both graduate students and undergraduate students. And that was philanthropically supported, over $1.2 million allocated to students. And then there was the CARES Act money. And that was $10.7 million. So the combination of the 10.7 from the CARES Act funding, as well as the 1.2 philanthropic funding, was all allocated to students. And I think by and large, equitably across undergraduates and graduate students. And that money has been allocated, right? So we are still focusing philanthropic efforts on student crisis funds. And so when alum who want to give, what we're encouraging them is to go to the crisis fund or the campus pantry, because that's another resource for folks that's really helpful. And we are also doing all that we can to lobby and advocate for more CARES Act money. It's my understanding that there's a likelihood that some of it will come through the pipeline, but it hasn't been confirmed yet. And I don't know when it will be, given kind of the political environment and space that we're in right now, but there is the promise of something on the horizon. And as soon as we know that, we will clearly signal. But what I'm finding, Kristen, is that where graduate students in particular might do best from an economic perspective is to network locally. So to actively work with the faculty members or your department chair or your dean. Sometimes I'll go to a dean because I hear a grad student's individual story and the dean's like, I had no idea. And so for you to do work kind of locally where you are can also be very helpful. And you may have already tried that, but I think that sometimes it's just important to remind graduate students that you can be some of your best own advocates. And I want to advocate for you too, and you're not alone in that. You deserve, rightfully, administrators and campus leaders who will advocate for you as well. And that does happen and that will continue to happen, but also to do some of that on your own. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you being transparent about we don't have money right now, but I'll let you know when it comes through, because the last thing I think a lot of us need right now is like false hope that we're going to somehow get more money from this. So I appreciate you just being honest and transparent about it.
Absolutely. And I'm not, we have on the president's kind of extended cabinet team, we have two colleagues, that one who works for the federal government and one who works with state government. And the one who works with federal government is, literally for the last 6 weeks, we keep saying, Virginia, what's the update? She just went on maternity leave, but there's someone now in her place. And so we continue to hear that it's coming. So I'm not trying to provide false hope. It's just, what I've heard, and hopefully it'll come sooner versus later. Thank you. Christina, something that you want to share? I just saw your photo.
Hi, buddy. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, thanks for being here. And I just wanted to add what the rest of the representatives here have said, and include the concerns of international students. We've been facing additional obstacles for our progress, and also increased uncertainty regarding the different policies that have been constantly changing regarding our visas or our visa duration with the pandemic. So, and also the inability of us of getting graduate assistantships if we are not staying here in the US. So that's another thing that's actually very troubling for international students.
Christina, I will tell you that in the 9 months that I've been here, I probably had as many conversations about the struggles of international students as I've had about any kind of population of students that I work with. And so I spent a fair amount of time with President Pines, and he is keenly aware of these issues and is advocating on behalf of as well. So what I do know is that the president, his cabinet, and the deans are often thinking about what is it that we as an institution have to do to support our international students. And there's also ongoing meetings that I've had with both Dan Laffin and Annie Rappaport, the former GSG leader, specifically trying to address some of these issues. There's been a small working group of graduate students. I don't see everybody on the screen, but I've been working with over the last 9 months to continue to advance our institutional efforts and response for international students. And so if there are particular things that you feel like need to be addressed, I would ask that you certainly share that with Dan Laffin and or share them with me, and we'll continue to advance those. I recently, it's actually part of my slide presentation, but I'd much rather just be in conversation with you all. I recently called, if I've learned anything over the last 9 months from Dan and Annie, is that graduate students and GSG continues to advocate on behalf of graduate students. And I think you do great work and really important work, but often you hit wall after wall after wall. And I think that there's an institutional responsibility to act on behalf of graduate students. And we've got to meet grad students halfway. And so recently I had shared a series of particular concerns that graduate students brought forward with a group of colleagues. And I said, I'm new here, trying to figure some things out. How do we advance things? And much of the feedback was, well, we recommend that GSG should do this, or GSG should go there. And I was like, no. This is not about GSG doing anything. It's about what are we doing as an institution to support. So Dan and I will continue to advance your collective needs and efforts. And so, Christina, sometimes what I know is that I can't know the things that you know in your lived experiences, because you experience them every day. For you to share them with Dan so we can actively work on them, we will do that.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else, just in terms of just checking in right now for what's coming up for you or what's bubbling for you in this, as we talk about this triple pandemic of COVID, health-related pandemic, the economic impact, as well as the social and racial injustices that have been here for a long time, but are continued to be elevated.
I want to point out first that I think the social and racial injustice is not so much a pandemic as a congenital condition that this country has had for a really, really long time.
I agree.
Secondly, I think one of my major concerns right now is with the undergrads in the classes that I'm TAing for, because I have seen their work drop off and more late submissions. And, obviously there's a real need there. And I know that the mental health center and stuff has had better staffing than we had last year at this time. But I don't think there's enough. And I don't know that we who see them once or twice a week can do enough to support them. So I guess I'm wondering, outside of emails and outreach in that regard, are there any tangible actions that the university is considering? I know that there was an article in the Diamondback about pass-fail. I don't know if that's actually on the table. I think it was an opinion piece, but I'm just curious as to what steps the university will be taking for the rest of the semester.
Valerie, first of all, let me say that the word you use, congenital, related to the racial and social injustice, I haven't heard that before, and I'm going to hold on to that. And I appreciate what you shared. Like you, I agree. It's just not. I think that even in my writings and even in my talks, I typically said, let's be clear, this has been going on for hundreds of years. It's just elevated right now, I think, in this moment in time. And so, like you, I never use the word congenital, but I may carry that forward, and I will quote you, Valerie Hall. I don't know if Valerie, right? I don't know if you've heard that from others, but I think I agree with you. I just want you to know that. What's curious that sometimes I use the word curious or interesting because I don't have other words sometimes. For 50 years, the Counseling Center has been doing something called the New Student Census. And I don't know if they survey grad students or not. So I got to check on that. I just recently they actually do it, I know, for undergrads for all 4 years, but I recently just got the data from just the incoming class and the incoming class transfers. And it was so compelling that I actually asked if my team in the counseling center would present it to the President Pines and the cabinet. What we know is that students, and they added to this year's census more questions about the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic on students. And what we knew already is that students are coming to college campuses. You look at last year and the year before and the year before, it just continues to rise. Students are coming to campus with more anxiety, more depression, a greater sense of loneliness. What students have said this year is that the pandemic has kind of elevated that, right? So it's more depression, more anxiety, more loneliness. And then we're telling them, stay away, stay in your rooms, be in singles, right? It's all kind of working against, right? We've shored up more counseling, but we're seeing a decrease in the number of students that are coming to counseling. So what's been curious to the counseling center is while they are positioned completely and have been to do both some in person, but I think that's minimal, and certainly tele-counseling and telehealth online. And part of it, we believe, is that people are just retreating, right? This overwhelmingness can make people retreat. And so we are actually, we being several of the members of the counseling center, there's also a behavioral health unit on campus from the health center, as well as members of RecWell, because we know that exercise and just being outdoors can be a real important antidote to depression and anxiety and some of those kinds of things. Are all kind of all form this kind of team well-being. Our meeting with the president to talk about things that we can do institutionally from even a messaging perspective that could help students understand where they can go. I think that the counseling center has done their own social media stuff, but they don't have a great following, right? We in student affairs continue to try to, on our weekly to all students messaging, the Get Connected student newsletter, to messages of there's people here to support you. So as much as we've done that, we're not seeing the uptick. And so what you're experiencing as a faculty member is students just not doing so well. And you can see a decline in their performance and not. So we are actively thinking about ways to do that. We even talked about the possibility of trying to figure out more mentoring programs. Or does every staff member in the division get 10 students that they reach out to one-on-one? Or that feels arbitrary. We don't want it to be arbitrary. We're trying to figure out and working with students to talk about that. So the long and the short of it is that there are no definitives right now, but we are continuing to explore it and continuing to try to find ways to reach out. I think sometimes reaching out through faculty can be some of the best things that we do, faculty and TAs, because of their direct involvement and connection to students. Like students show up to classes every day, either virtually or in person. And if there's a way for us to encourage faculty and or TAs to message to students that there are resources and options available to them, that may be a way forward too. Do you have some thoughts as you work with students in the classroom that you would recommend? I hear your observations and I wonder if you might offer some recommendations too.
I'm not sure. And I feel like this is something that the faculty in my department, which is a pretty small department and not well funded in the humanities, is kind of struggling with as well. I mean, we're all overwhelmed by, just the general existential dread of everything happening outside of academia right now, as well as trying to figure out how to reach students in our classes and how to keep them engaged when we know they're overwhelmed and we know that we have no control over how other faculty members are working with the students and what their demands are. I mean, in the class that I'm working in, my faculty supervisor has been great about kind of letting late assignments slide and telling students to get stuff in when they can and not penalizing them too harshly in that regard. But, we're kind of at a loss as to how to keep them motivated. We don't just want to broadly announce you don't have to turn anything in until you're ready to, because that is not going to work either. But
Sure.
so, it's a fine line between that kind of flexibility, but also not broadcasting it to make it so that there's no accountability within the classroom.
Yeah. So Valerie, I meet with the provost as well today too. I might just talk with her about some things that she might do to work with the deans. And I really appreciate your being in the struggle very much. And just as human being to human being, I appreciate your care for and support with and for our students, knowing you're a student too. But in that place of responsibility as someone who's got responsibility for a classroom. So thank you for that. And I do think that institution, we have to offer resources to you. So I'll talk with the provost about that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Valerie, Patty, do you mind if I just chime in on this as someone who's coming from the psychology department? So kind of as this conversation was unfolding, a couple of things popped up in my mind. First of all, I appreciate that the counseling center has, kind of taken on more people in counseling roles. But interestingly, I think that the university is not a unique place for underrepresentation of mental health professionals. This is a nationwide issue that we're seeing that psychologists have been studying for a long time, and suggesting that if everyone wanted a psychologist or therapist, as I would say is actually probably a good thing, I would probably recommend that. There would not be enough therapists in the world, enough psychologists to handle the number of people that we have in the United States. But additionally, I feel like something that's happening for students, and I feel like I've experienced this myself as a graduate student, is that when you become so overwhelmed and you get into a place where you're having these mental health struggles and you feel like you're struggling, the idea of going out and seeking help is just another thing on your list that sounds hard and insurmountable on a long list of things that you have to accomplish. And so it's just something to think about when you're thinking about how to market mental health services, is that making them incredibly easy and accessible is really important. And when the counseling center does become overwhelmed, I know this from personal experience, you have to reach outside of the university to find someone who, one, accepts your insurance, right? Two, is a quality counselor or therapist who can handle the unique problems that you're facing. And that can take months. And sometimes I've heard people also like looking for therapists for years before actually getting the help they need. And so I'm going to agree with you that probably a more successful tactic is coming up with some university-wide branding or university-wide message that you can deliver to students, and also thinking about how you can make those services more accessible, even still.
Yeah, thank you, Tamara. I really appreciate that. I very much appreciate that. I do think that, one of the strange things that the pandemic has taught us is how to be much more accessible to students from a counseling perspective. And so we have some students that are now coming to that counseling that wouldn't come to counseling because they're able to do it virtually. And that just creates a different space for them. And there's more that we have to do. I agree. So thank you for that. Other questions or concerns that you want to lift while we create this space, as I have a sense of what graduate student life is like and what you all are carrying. So when I talk about the congenital and pandemic realities that we are living through right now, I have a sense of what you're carrying. And so creating these kinds of spaces are really, really important. Laura, did you want to say something? I saw that you came on screen. Or Victoria, you've been on screen for a while. Often people are on screen when they know.
Oh, I just wanted to echo what everyone's saying. And thank you for giving us this space to talk.
Thank you, Laura. I think sometimes in moments like this, sometimes the best things that we can do as leaders is just to create space and just to care for each other, just to be present with each other. I think that often as graduate students, we're constantly thinking about what's next, like that stuff that's always hanging over us. And just to be present with each other is, I think, one of the most important and valuable things that we can do. And so while I prepared a presentation that maybe I will come back to later, maybe I'll be reinvited and do that presentation, I couldn't imagine today happening, just jumping right into a presentation. I know that's what this academic environment often calls us to do. Get the work done, achieve, produce. I just needed to be in space with you and want to remind you that my hope is that you create this space wherever you are, whether it's with your family of choice, groups of friends, whether it's with students that you've got responsibility for, whether it's with staff that you supervise, that you don't just go through today acting like it's just another day. Because let's be clear, today will forever be, in the next couple of days, forever be in the history books of the United States. Just like this pandemic, we are living through clearly unprecedented times. And all of us have the benefit, maybe the burden of living through this time that humanity will talk about in perpetuity.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Perillo, for all of that. That's wonderful stuff. We do have to, unfortunately, move on to other business. So
Right.
thank you for
So
coming.
I would love, Simon, if it's okay, maybe it's Dan who does it, but at some point in time, really would love to come back to talk with you all about student affairs, because most of you don't even know what student affairs is. That there's 3,000 people that work in student affairs, there's 14 departments, that actually the #1 graduate program in the country for student affairs and higher education is right here in our College of Education, that we have tons of graduate students that work in the Division of Student Affairs, that there's a very intentional purpose and focus that student affairs has for the graduate and undergraduate experience. And I think as graduate students, particularly if many of you are thinking about going into academia, for you to understand student affairs and its work and its discipline and its scholarship and its focus is really important. And so I'm trying to invite myself back at a time that I can talk with you all about that too. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't anticipate that being a hard lift for us. So,
Thanks, Simon. I appreciate that. Y'all please take care of yourselves, okay?
So now we have some other folks joining us to discuss GSG A40A04, which was the act to release the text of the embargoed resolution of GSG A37R06. For that discussion, we need to move into executive session. So I would look for a motion to move to executive session to begin the discussion. Yes, Yehuda.
A motion to move to executive session.
Are there any objections? All right, seeing none.
Simon?
Yes, Tyler.
I don't mean to interrupt. Just because I do have a hard stop and I was requested for this, is it possible that the agenda could be slightly reshuffled unless you don't foresee this taking terribly long?
We've actually got other folks who also have hard stops on this other issue.
My apologies. Okay.
No, you're good. So I think we're going to do that. So unless there is objection, we'll move to executive session now. Seeing none, if Edie, you would kindly move any guests into the waiting room. Guests, you will be, of course, welcomed back in once executive session is over. That is, of course, with the exception of Dr. Conrath, who is going to be speaking to us about the issue, and Mark will be speaking to us about the issue, and then obviously take us off of the live stream, if you would, Edie. So we'll give